What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another 3D model. This week, we're going to be making a coffee machine. And not just any coffee machine, we are going to be making a sci-fi coffee machine. So without further ado, let's just dive into it. Now I am a really big coffee fan. Like many of you out there, I probably drink too much coffee. But I realized while looking around trying to decide what I wanted to make for this week's video, I realized I never really made a coffee machine before. So that got me thinking, and I didn't want to just make any ordinary plain old coffee machine. I wanted this one to be futuristic and sci-fi looking. So I jumped on Google Images and started looking around for different coffee machine ideas, just to gather up some reference. And while looking around online, I came across this image of a coffee machine created by an artist named Igor Ivanov. And what I really loved about this was all the color, and it looked kind of comical, a little bit stylized, I guess you can say. And it reminded me a lot of the other sci-fi terminal we made a few weeks ago, or months now. And I thought this would be a kind of a fun route to kind of work towards. So I continued looking for different models, and I also found this one. And this concept and idea was created from a studio called Astro Bakers. So I decided to stick with these two references as my main inspiration and reference for this week's video and kind of create my own. And in the end, it basically was a recreation of the model from Astro Bakers. So really big shout out to that studio for creating such awesome artwork and coming up with this idea and also inspiring this week's video. Now, like I said, this was basically a model similar to that sci-fi terminal. And I wanted to basically create another coffee maker that would exist in the same universe. So I wanted it to be colorful and kind of comical, so a lot of really round bevels, kind of unrealistic shapes, and something that was just a little bit futuristic and sci-fi looking. So the first step, of course, was blocking out all of those main shapes. So that's what I started with, a few cubes and cylinders, and started piecing together those main shapes. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, you know I usually create my models on the weekends, but this coming weekend I'm actually going away, so I had to do this one in the evenings throughout the week. So like usual, things are quite busy over here, and I really didn't have a lot of time this week to get this one done. So I set a goal of around 2 hours to complete the modeling. Now, of course, like many 3D models, I'm sure a lot of you artists out there can agree, you usually just want to continue adding shapes to a model and you come up with more ideas and you just keep working on it and you can really drag out the whole process. So that 2 hour goal I originally thought of making turned out to be around 3.5 hours. I feel like the more I worked on this piece, the more objects I wanted to add, and I just had more ideas. Of course, I was using these main references as my inspiration and goal to work towards, but I also came up with a few different ideas along the way, and I just wanted to continue adding to it, and I just had to decide when to cut it off and call it quits. So this one was definitely challenging. I wish I had more time to invest into it, and I feel like we could have added a few more elements to it, but it is what it is. I'm still happy with how it turned out. Now, to achieve this whole sci-fi kind of comical look, the main thing was having really nice round bevels. I feel like that really adds to the whole stylized artistic look, and it really makes it more comical and fun. So that was the main thing I wanted to do with this model, was create some really nice bevels. Now, due to my lack of time, you'll see throughout this piece, I definitely had to rush a few things, and a lot of that ended up being with the topology. I definitely could have cleaned this up a lot more. That's just one thing I wanted to get out of the way. I really had to just call it quits at the end and just wrap up a few things. So as you can see, the whole modeling process, we did have to rush some stuff and end up just merging some vertices together just to quickly get it done. But I just wanted to get that out of the way. If you do have more time to invest into a model like this, I would definitely spend a bit more time making the topology a little bit more clean. So what I like to do right off the bat is just start kind of piecing things together to get those main shapes out of the way. And I really don't try to worry too much about topology at the beginning. That way I can just freely work with the shapes and not really worry too much about the vertices and the edge loops, because I feel like that can take away the whole artistic element to it and just having fun with shapes and trying to piece something fun together. Now, of course, this isn't going into a video game, so I wasn't trying to aim at some specific poly count or anything like that. We were just trying to make something fun for this week's video. So as you can see, I'm just gonna start adding random edge loops just to try to get those main shapes and main key elements out of the way. And then we can start moving on to more fun things and adding a little bit more detail to everything. Now, when it came to the textures, there was a new update recently. I'm not sure exactly when it was released, but it's a new filter that they released called anisotropic, I may be completely butchering this, so I apologize in advance, but anisotropic Kuwahara. It's a really cool filter that you can add to your materials to make it really look kind of stylized and comic-like. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to experiment with that. So that's one thing that we're going to use differently in this week's video. We are going to use this filter to try to achieve that stylized look. Now, unlike our last sci-fi terminal that we created, I added a lot of stickers and elements to it to make it more fun. That's one thing I was trying to avoid with this model. It's always really tempting, at least for myself, to add stickers to things because I find it makes it really fun. It's a cool element to add a lot of models. And that's something I didn't want to do with this one since I thought it would look very similar to the previous model. Now, if you haven't seen that video, please go check it out. It's on my YouTube channel, of course. But for this video, I wanted to avoid that and try to think of other elements that I can add to it. So we'll go over that more when we jump to the texturing part of this video, but for now, we need to worry about the modeling. So as you can see, I'm just starting with that main shell, the main body shape of this coffee maker, and then we can move on to the other larger elements like the pole in the back and the coffee mug and the big coffee pot, all the other large objects, then we can slowly move to the more finer details and the smaller elements. And like almost every model, it's really important not to rush the blockout stage. It's always more difficult to come back and try reworking things once you add more polys to it. So while everything's low in poly and really blocked out, this is the best opportunity to really define those main shapes before you move on to more fun things. So try your best not to rush it. Really take your time throughout the whole blockout stage. It's going to make your whole process a lot easier in the end. Now, don't forget, you can find this full video in real time, which includes the full UV mapping process, and you can also get access to all the 3D models and all the other working files, and all of it will be available on my Patreon page, which you can find the link in the description below. And I give all my models away that you see on this YouTube channel, so if there's ever any other models you're interested in seeing or other working files you'd like to kind of reverse engineer and seeing how I put different materials together, all of it you can find on my Patreon page, and it's also the best way to help support my art. So if you like these types of videos and you want to see more random 3D models down the road, please check out my Patreon page, and also please consider subscribing to the channel. All right, like I said, I don't have a lot of time this week. I worked all day and I only have the evenings to get some modeling done. So we need to kind of step it into second gear here and try to get as much work done as we can in a little amount of time. So enough of me talking, let's continue blocking some shapes out, and let's slowly make a sci-fi coffee machine. right, so here is the coffee machine in its finished form. And everything is basically the exact same. Now, of course, there are a few small details I decided to add. I feel like almost every model I make, there's a few tiny little details I decided to add at the very end. And in this one, I just made a little sticky note on the side. So just simply added a plane, just curved it with the soft select brush, and stuck a little piece of tape on the very top of it just to stick it on the side, just to add another element. It was also in the reference, and I wasn't originally going to add it, but I thought it was a cool little element to the whole model. And once again, it would just make it more fun, hopefully, to look at. And besides that one, I also decided to add a few extra buttons to the front. It was just looking a little bit plain. I was going to add some different bump into the materials, but I thought having another glowing element like the screen up here would just make it, once again, a little bit more fun. Other than that, everything else is basically the exact same. I'm pretty sure that's it. Actually, there's one other little element. I added these very small pieces of tape. I really liked in the reference photo how those tiny pieces of tape everywhere. And I did add some in that Sci-Fi computer or terminal that we made a few months ago now. So I didn't want to add too many pieces of tape since I thought it'd be very similar to that model, but I did like having an extra, just a small color in here that was different than the other materials. And once again, hopefully just adding an extra little element. I really was tempted to add a bunch of stickers on the side or on the back or even on the top, and I actually ended up adding a little one on the top. I couldn't resist, but I was really tempted to add just like a bunch of stickers on the side here. And since we did that in the Sci-Fi terminal in that previous YouTube video, I was just holding off on doing that because I didn't want to just basically recreate the same thing. So that's one element I probably would have added normally, but I held off in this video. But other than that, everything else is basically the exact same. So let's go over those UVs. Now, if I open up my folder, you'll see I basically grouped this into 3 different groups for the 3 different textures. Now, why 3? To be honest with you, I probably could have added more. Since this wasn't being used in the video game, I could have just went crazy and added more textures to get more resolution out of those materials. But I thought it'd be good, like it's always good practice to try to hold off on creating a million different textures. Of course, if it's going to be used in like a movie or something, you can add a million textures because it's all pre-rendered. But most of the time, since this stuff is rendered in real time, like in any video game environment or something like that, you do need to just be cautious with the amount of materials you use. So I always find it's good practice just to kind of stay in kind of having that idea in the back of my head. So I didn't want to go above 3 textures. Now in the end that did backfire because I kind of rushed the whole UVing stage. Actually, we're going to go through that right now and I'll show you why that backfired. So if I look at let me pull up my UV editor here. If I open up the first group in texture, you'll see that it's basically just the main shell. Now with these models, I just simply added a subdivision, so it does look a little bit dense when it comes to polys. And like I said, I really rushed the whole modeling process. There's a lot of cleaning up I could have done. I ended up just like merging a lot of these vertices together. And once you smooth that out, it just kind of creates a little bit of a mess and a lot of just like redundant useless UVs like this one right here in the middle, or even these ones. I could have just deleted all of these. These ones running in the middle, it's just useless, and it's just adding more geometry or more tries, more polys to the scene that are just unnecessary. So that's something that I try to usually do in my models, but because we were rushing so much, I just decided just to say whatever and just quickly subdivide it. So that's just something I know I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and I wanted just to bring up again because when I'm looking at models like this, you know, this one, for example, I could have easily just deleted that and it would just save me in polys, and saving on polys is always a good thing. But another thing, because I was rushing the whole UV mapping process, I decided just to grab all of the models or elements in this group that were not grouped. So a lot of the stuff that I grouped together is stuff, not always, but it's stuff that's sharing the same UV space. That's like stacking my UV shell. So for example, this side is stacked with this side, and actually this is stacked as well. Don't know why it's not grouped. Oh, here it is. These are all sharing the same UV space. Now, as you can see, this is quite small on my UV map. And what I usually like to do, if you're familiar with this channel, is I like to give priority to the more important elements in my model. So for example, the UV shell on the bottom here is on the bottom. I could have deleted those faces. It does not need to be so large on my UV map. Now, if you use the automatic layout, it gives the same texel density to all your UV shells in your scene that are grouped together. So for example, all these UV shells, if I control U and automatically lay them out, it's going to make the texel density the same between all of these objects, which is good in theory, but it's not always going to benefit your model. In fact, it can actually make it more challenging when it comes to texturing, because your texel density on the side of this face, which is really important because it's like right in your face and it's one of the main sides of the model, is going to be the exact same texel density as the bottom. And we don't need it to be the same because you're never going to see the bottom. In fact, I could have taken this shell and shrunk it very, very small and put it to the side, almost even deleted these faces. I should have also had maybe a UV cut on the front here, so these faces right here wouldn't be shrunk down with it, but the bottom, anyways, the shell would have been separated. And what I found when I came to the texturing and I wanted to add a couple stickers or different labels to the sides of these faces, they were very pixelated. And the reason why is because these shells are so small that it only has so many pixels to work with. And that happened at the very end when I added a little warning label on the bottom here. If you look at those final renders, you can see it's kind of pixelated and it's not so clear. And the main reason is just because the shell is so small. And normally what I like to do, like I said, is give priority to my more important shells. So what I would do, like I said, I would shrink down the bottom ones and I would enlarge the ones that I'm planning to add more detail to. So any faces that are planning to have labels or words printed on them, well, those shells are going to be a lot larger because I need more detail in those areas. Now, of course, proceed with caution when you do that, because when you're working in a game studio or you're working with a bigger team, it's important to keep the same texel density throughout your whole project. Otherwise, a lot of models are going to look a lot different in different resolutions. So when you're just making models for fun, this is definitely something that I try to do because, like I said, you get more resolution in certain areas, but just be aware that when you're working with a larger team, you may not always be able to do that. So, talk to your art lead or talk to your art director and see what texel density you need to use in your project. But usually when you're working just by yourself and making fun models, this is definitely something I like to do is, like I said, give priority to those larger UV shells. And that's one issue that I ran into when I was basically texturing this model. I wanted to add certain words or random labels I randomly thought of in certain areas. For example, these things. I was planning to add like a little black square, and look how tiny this UV shell is. It's so small. Honestly, I didn't even realize because I was rushing. I should have taken this whole element and just moved it to another spot and just like even enlarged it a little bit, like something like that, just to get more resolution out of those materials. Like I said, I rushed. What I did was grab all of these models and objects that are not grouped, and I just did an automatic layout. And then I took my group objects, so stuff like this, and I just found a little area just to kind of squish them down into. So, it is what it is. If I could go back and redo this model, or I had more time to invest into it, that's definitely something that I would do differently. And I usually don't do this in my YouTube videos, so I apologize, but this week I had to get this one done really quickly, so it is what it is. Anyways, enough of me talking about that. Let's move on to the second group, which is the other main elements or body pieces in this model. So the other large pieces, basically. It's pretty straightforward. Everything is highlighted. And as you can see, try to make sure that all those shells are nice and straight. That way I can kind of condense them and fit them really nicely in this 0 to 1 space. But once again, the same issue happened. I did automatically lay out all of the objects that are not grouped. And then I took the grouped elements and just kind of squished them down really small. Like these buttons. Look how tiny that button is. I actually added a little like on alpha, like a little symbol of the on button, and it was kind of pixelated, and the reason is because look at what it has to work with. Like there's such little pixels in this little UV shell, And I didn't plan out what I was gonna add, so I was kind of just experimenting along the way. And that's another thing I try to do in all my textures or my models, is really plan out what button, if this is gonna be an on button, okay, well, I know ahead of time I need to make this UV shell a little bit large because I'm planning to add some sort of symbol on it. And I really didn't do that with this model, and that's something, once again, that backfired. I could have taken some other element, like maybe these feet, or this, for example. It's the bottom, it's never in view. I could have just shrunk this down super small and grabbed something like this button and swap places for it, just to get more resolution out of that detail. But it is what it is. There's always things you can do differently, especially when you're trying to rush to get things done. Anyways, on to the last group, and texture. And that's everything else in the scene. That's all the small elements. So the coffee mug, the coffee pot, and a few of the stickers and labels, and everything else basically I couldn't fit in the other UV sets. This one was a little bit easier since I had a lot of fewer elements to work with. I could just enlarge a lot of these, but it is what it is. I feel like I could have done a better job with laying out these UV shells, but you can't win them all. So anyways, what I had to do was assign a different texture to each group, so we'd have to see a different texture set in Substance Painter. Once those materials are applied, we can export this thing, jump over to Substance, and start our texturing. Don't forget, you can find the full UV mapping process on my Patreon page, which will be part of that real-time video. All right, so now jumping over to Substance Painter, we exported that FBX. We can drag it into our Substance file and start baking out those textures. So when it comes to those materials, we're obviously going to work towards that comical kind of sci-fi stylized look. And one of the new features, like I said, that came out recently, I mentioned at the beginning of this video, was that anisotropic, I think that's how you say it, anisotropic Kuwahara. Apologize if I'm completely butchering that, but it's a really cool filter that you can add onto your materials to kind of add this, I don't even know how to explain it, kind of blurs your materials to add this kind of stylized comic look to it. And I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to actually try this new filter out. So that's one of the main things I'm going to do when it comes to this. And all you have to do is just simply drag it onto your mesh in your scene. And then you can use the slider to decide how much of that effect you want to apply to it. But I really blurred it out. I wanted to make it kind of look fake looking, kind of comic looking. I was really trying not to make it look too realistic. And similar to our stylized computer or terminal that we created, like I keep mentioning, I wanted it to look like it existed in that kind of same universe. So that's what we're gonna be doing. And we're gonna experiment with a lot of things along the way. I was planning to add a lot of different alphas and stamp a lot of little details. I ended up stamping a lot of little rectangles all over this model. Just similar to our reference photo. I use this reference as my main inspiration, and since we were kind of rushing through the texturing as well, I just took so many ideas from this reference. So once again, just a massive shout out to Astro Bakers and that studio for creating such cool artwork. I feel like yours still looks so much better than mine. I love your materials that you used and how much more worn out it was. I kind of wish I did something more similar to what you guys did, but I also didn't want to stare at your reference the whole time, and I tried to just kind of work not looking at the reference and kind of come up with some different ideas along the way as well. So we're just going to experiment. We're going to apply different materials, different elements, different alphas, kind of play around with things and see what works and what doesn't, and whatever I think feels right, we're just going to go with. And that's honestly something I love about models like this. We're not so stuck on making it look a certain way. You can just have fun with it a little bit more. It's kind of a little more stress-free. And as an artist, it's really fun to work in an environment like that. You don't always get that opportunity when you're working in the real world. So it's kind of fun to not stare at a reference photo and recreate something and kind of just have more fun with some elements. So let's have fun with this one. Let's start texturing and applying different materials. I'm going to use a lot of these smart materials to my advantage just to start filling in those empty meshes, kind of use them as some main foundation to work off of. Then we can add different roughness values and add more black mass to add different smart materials and smart filters. That way we can slowly build up a little bit of dirt and grunge and make it look a little bit used and worn out. Now, like I mentioned, also I was really holding back on using stickers on this model, but at the end I decided to drag in a few labels and one sticker on the top just to add some extra elements. I really feel like adding stickers on that one side would be really fun, but it is what it is. I also added that insert coffee label on the very front, which I thought was a fun element as well. I feel like adding different labels just makes it more fun to look at from an outsider's perspective, at least for myself. So that's something we're gonna do also later on. And I recommend adding more labels and think of more fun things you can add, maybe more sticky notes on the side, or maybe like a coffee checklist, like a clean filter kind of sheet would be cool. Maybe add it on the back or on the side, or I don't know, other sci-fi elements. There's so many different things you can do. So experiment and have some fun. And I'm sure you can come up with some better ideas than I did. So anyways, enough of me talking. Let's start filling in these meshes with different materials, and let's slowly texture our sci-fi coffee maker. All right, and that is everything. That is the full 3D modeling, UV mapping, and texturing process that I did to create this Sci-Fi Coffee Machine. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel or liking this video, or if you want to take it an extra step further, go check out my Patreon page. It is by far the best place you can help support my art, and you can help support future videos. And don't forget, you can find this full video in real time along with all the working files and all the 3D models and all that jazz. You can find it all on my Patreon page, which I will link to in the description below. Also, as always, a massive shout out to all my patrons. I really can't thank you all enough. You guys are all so amazing, and a lot of you have stuck with me for so long. I can even think of so many of you on top of my head that have been with me since the very beginning. And I just want you all to know it doesn't go unnoticed. And I am planning to do something for you guys in the near future. I'm just not sure exactly what I'm going to do, but I definitely want to do something to help just show my appreciation to you all, because you all support me, and you guys are all amazing. So thank you so much for supporting my art and for being with me throughout this journey. All right, let me know in the comments what you thought about this week's video. It was a lot of fun to create. Like I said, rushed a lot of things. Looking back, I wish I did a lot of things differently, but it is what it is. Still really happy with how it turned out, and it was a lot of fun to make. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will catch you all in the next one.